I am very pleased to be able to speak to this important hearing, and I want to thank Lord Avery for the opportunity to discuss with you the human rights situation in Bahrain. It's a situation that is a reason for grave concern on my part as a special rapporteur on torture, because we continue to hear of a harsh clampdown on human rights defenders and on peaceful demonstrators, and that in the context of a highly polarized political situation is the reason why the United Nations Special Procedures have expressed quite an interest in Bahrain. On a regular basis, my mandate receives information and allegations of torture and ill treatment of detainees, including beatings and forced confessions. We also receive information about denial of medical treatment of people who are incarcerated and are suffering different ailments. Some of them originated in torture and some of them pre-existing, but either way in violation of the obligation of the state of Bahrain to provide adequate medical treatment to anybody in detention. We are also concerned that there is very little information pointing to the fulfillment of Bahrain's obligation to investigate, prosecute, and punish torture. We understand that there have been 2 convictions to policemen to 10 years, with sentences of 10 years in prison for causing the death of an inmate. But other than that, we also hear that the Ombudsman of Bahrain says that there are currently 12 cases before courts involving police officers and 2 before disciplinary boards, but we don't have any information as to what are the charges that are used, that are filed against these individuals, nor what the outcome of those prosecutions may be. We also receive frequent complaints about excessive use of force in repression of demonstrations in the street. Since the clashes of early 2011, those reports have been unceasing. We have continued to receive them, which means that the government has not changed its policy regarding crowd control or regarding excessive use of force in repressing demonstrations. The important recommendations made by the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry under the chairmanship of Professor Sharif Bassiouni are all in a state of non-implementation, despite the fact that it's been more than 3 years since that seminal report has been published. Similarly, all the recommendations made by the Human Rights Council during the Universal Periodic Review of Bahrain seem, as far as we can tell, not being implemented by Bahrain at this point. At the same time, there has been no progress in ratifying the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture that would facilitate independent prison visits in Bahrain. There are many political prisoners who have been arrested, mistreated and tortured and unjustly convicted to lengthy prison terms in the 2.5 years since the political conflict began. It seems that new arrests of activists seem to be on the rise again. The government claims that it has been making some positive achievement. We note, for example, the creation of the Office of the Public Ombudsman, of the Police Ombudsman as part of the Ministry of Interior in August of 2012, and the official launch of this office in July of 2013. However, there are serious questions regarding the independence and effectiveness of this office. It certainly does not comply with the Paris Principles on national human rights institutions. In February of 2012, the government created a special investigation unit in the Public Prosecution Office. But again, we see no signs that this is a serious, independent and impartial investigation unit, or that it has had any effect in investigating cases of torture. As many of you know, I was invited by the government of Bahrain to visit the country. The original visit was planned for March of 2012, and the government cancelled at the very last minute, literally within days of having to arrive in Manama. After lengthy negotiations, we settled on another date for April of 2013, and again, at the very last minute, the government cancelled that visit. It has also tried to portray the cancellations as my decisions. I want emphatically to state that I have never reneged on my intention to visit Bahrain. Not only in both cases the decision was unilaterally made by the government despite my protests to the contrary, but also I have since April of 2013 I have been asking the government of Bahrain to set another date, since it says that they are only postponing my visit but not cancelling it. It's been more than 1 year and at least 3 notes on my part, and I have not been able to make the government of Bahrain establish a firm date for my visit to the country. In March of this year, I had a meeting in Geneva with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and it was a very inconclusive meeting. The Minister again told me of the intention of the government to invite me eventually, but was not in a position to commit to any specific date. And he even tried to make it appear that I had myself cancelled at least one of the visits, which is completely untrue. The government seems to count a proposal of a date that I couldn't accept because of previous commitments as a cancellation. The 2 cancellations that the government produced were on previously agreed upon dates, and as I said, both happened at the very last minute when all the plans were in place for my travel. I am continuing, of course, to insist on going to Bahrain, and of course, beyond that, I continue to follow the situation as closely as I can. So, as you may know, we have sent several communications, and I have published my final views on the cases that were at different stages brought to my attention. They have been published in the communications reports of the Office of the High Commissioner, and in several cases I found that Bahrain was in breach of its international obligations with regards to torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment in the cases presented before me. Most recently, in the course of this year, 2014, I have had occasion to send at least 2 additional cases. In both cases, the government of Bahrain has responded, but with very cursory information about the fact that these people have been incarcerated and prosecuted and in some cases punished, but without any response to my inquiry about whether in fact they had been mistreated or tortured during their interrogation, or whether the evidence used against them was based on coercion. which would be in violation of Bahrain's obligations under the Convention Against Torture. So the two recent cases that I have sent to Bahrain involve the torture and ill-treatment of Mr. Ahmed Al-Arab, a 22-year-old nurse, student, and political activist who was arrested on 9 January of 2014 in Hamad town. His relatives claim that he was severely beaten by security officers in order to obtain a confession, and he was stripped naked, beaten, and sexually assaulted. They also put a cloth on his face and poured water on his face to make him feel like he was drowning, the torture technique known as waterboarding. He was also hung up and naked by his arms. In addition, he suffered a shoulder injury because of this, and my information is that this very severe injury is not being treated while he is in custody. The other case is perhaps even more egregious because it involves a 15-year-old, Mr. Ibrahim Al-Megdad, who was 15 years old when he was arrested in 2012. My reports claim that he was beaten, threatened, and insulted, and that his captors attempted to sexually assault him. He was subjected to mock execution, and he was moved around in different detention centers, but in the dry dock detention center he was reportedly held with adults and convicted criminals. It seems that the criminal court that convicted him has relied on evidence extracted under duress and refused to investigate the complaint of torture and ill treatment filed by his lawyer. His family has been prevented from attending the verdict and sentencing hearing, and he was ultimately sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment under an anti-terrorism law for burning a police vehicle. I mentioned these two cases because they are the most recent that I've been working on, but also because they seem to me to be illustrative of the ongoing policies of the government of Bahrain in violation of the most clear standards of human rights protection, prohibiting torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment. I hope that this hearing contributes to bring attention to the situation in Bahrain, and that it makes a step towards persuading the authorities in Bahrain about allowing independent investigations, but also to start implementing the recommendations that the whole international community has been making to them on how to treat the very highly polarized situation in the country today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very successful hearing.